Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and we've had a bumper session. We had a second round of voting in the Tory leadership contest yesterday, followed by a TV debate, followed today by a third round. So I'm going to try and cover all of those, or at least the salient points. And with yesterday, there were 6 of the original 10 leadership candidates having survived for the second round of voting. Yesterday saw 5 of them proceed to the next round. Dominic Raab was the guy who gives the strongest impression that he knows nothing of value. He fell at the second hurdle, now out of the competition. Now, as the Daily Telegraph was supporting him, they'll have to find another horse to back now. I couldn't quite tell from their headlines today who they'll be pushing for, but given that Boris Johnson writes a column for them and Raab's pitch was essentially to be a more Boris version of Boris, I think I can probably guess who they would get behind. Now, with Dominic Raab's departure, the last of the candidates committing to leaving the EU on October 31st has evaporated. What's that, I hear you say? Boris Johnson has committed to leaving in October. Has he? I'll be coming to that in a few minutes. But first, although Rory Stewart was the candidate with the fewest votes out of the ones that made it through the first round, he had been gaining a bit of momentum. That's partly down to the fact that he's the only candidate that isn't standing in Boris Johnson's shadow, but also because other candidates are going a little bit soft. Leadership contests involve a lot of tricky political manoeuvring. When a new leader is elected, they seek to reward their supporters. The only time their opponents get a good job out of it is if they are too dangerous to leave on the back benches. So with everyone feeling that Johnson is too far out in front, many MPs have been switching their support for him, at least publicly. We don't know how they all vote, because I think that's anonymous, but even the other candidates have toned down their attacks on him, thinking about their ministerial futures in a Boris Johnson government. Only Rory Stewart was still going on an all-out attack on him. In fact, an all-out attack on all of the remaining candidates, really. I'd already said that I believe he's positioned himself to be the I told you so candidate for the leadership contest to come after Brexit or a disastrous general election, whichever. But the reason is immaterial. He is the only candidate that would provide the membership with a genuine alternative to Johnson. And this is why he was standing to attract the anti-Boris support in Parliament. It's slow, however, and he's not likely to gain much from the exit of Dominic Raab. His best hope was always another candidate dropping out and their backers getting behind Rory. He even tried to do a deal with Michael Gove to go on a single ticket to basically try and grab his supporters, but Michael Gove went basically, no, I got more votes than you. I don't think we're doing that. So there we go. The danger that Rory Stewart posed could be felt in the pro-Brexit media, of course, as accusations of spying were levelled at him. Odd that they'd only just come to light at a point in the leadership contest where he was gathering momentum. Read into that what you will. Sajid Javid, who might have been considered a frontrunner some months ago, but has run a poor campaign. He was trying to push his Humble's beginning angle. Talking down the old boys network of Eton and Oxford to distinguish himself. His pitch has always been that he's the embodiment of the conservative doctrine that hard work leads to success in life. But apart from an uninspiring campaign, there also seems to be a little bit of a feeling that a Prime Minister from a Muslim background, although he himself is not Muslim, may not hit it off with the current US President, especially as Javid has been critical of Trump in the past. Now, granted, so has Boris Johnson, but he got away with it. Javid came last in the second round of voting, and there is speculation that at some point he could drop out rather than wait to be eliminated, and support Boris Johnson, in the hopes of being promised a senior cabinet position. I'm guessing that he hasn't dropped out yet, that hasn't been forthcoming just yet. He surely has no chance of winning the top job for himself. Not only did he get to finish last yesterday, out of the candidates who went through at any rate, as well as today, come to it, but you don't get the feeling he has anything to distinguish himself from the other candidates, at least nothing that would appeal to the wider membership. But the second round of voting in the leadership election was just the hors d'oeuvre yesterday. The main event was the BBC TV debate between what was at the time the 5 remaining candidates. It was dubbed by some as the Boris and Rory show, which inevitably it was going to be. The other 3 are trapped between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, if they really tore into Boris, then they'd find themselves out of favour if he wins. No senior cabinet post for them, boo-hoo. So to attack him and improve their own chances of winning, they'd have to be on a firm platform of appeal themselves, offering something different. But they have nothing. So they're all just raising polite objections to him, knowing that they can't really beat him. It wouldn't surprise me if it was only Javid angling for a promise of a good post once Boris became Prime Minister, but I think that would change in the coming days. Javid's best idea during the TV debate seemed to be trying to get the other candidates to agree to an independent external investigation into the Conservative Party on the issue of Islamophobia. Now, I would imagine that would have gone down like a lead balloon in the wider membership. I don't think it was all that welcome amongst the other candidates, even though they seemed to go along with it. So if the current Home Secretary was hoping to get any sort of boost for his leadership campaign, last night's debate was the time to do it. But I'd say he's either given up or he's just blown it big time. There was also a reason why Boris Johnson agreed to take part in this debate, but not the one on Channel 4, and that's because he was never going to have his assertions put under serious scrutiny here. Still, it wasn't necessarily necessary to put too much under scrutiny. Although Johnson didn't commit too many gaffes, he did still show weakness that could sink him yet. Now, that's not to say there weren't a few howlers, but the BBC were never going to pounce on those. Such as, for example, his claim that his involvement had no bearing on Zaghari Ratcliffe's having an extended stay in an Iranian prison. He also suggested, rather bafflingly, that his idea to raise the threshold of the 40% tax band would help struggling nurses. Nurses who are struggling due to a government he was a part of, incidentally, but also willfully ignoring the fact that nurses don't actually earn enough to benefit from the threshold of that tax band being moved upwards. I mean, you couldn't make it up. I'll translate what he said into plain English. Yes, the government I was part of slashed the number of nurses, meaning that those remaining have way too much work and stress now. I also stifled their wages, so now some have to turn to food banks. But as Prime Minister, I'll help by giving high earners like myself a tax cut. Oh, it won't affect nurses, but somehow it will help nurses. That's good, isn't it? But the big question that his rivals wanted him to answer, of course, was concerning his commitment to leave the EU by the end of October. They know it's impossible to leave by then, not without destroying themselves in the process. So pinning Boris down on the issue was the main event. So before we go over what he said, let's just refresh the impression he has been trying to give. Boris Johnson has given the impression, if you ask supporters of Boris Johnson what his position on Brexit is as Prime Minister, they would say that he is going to seek to renegotiate the backstop and, if unsuccessful, before October the 31st, simply allowing us to leave with no deal. In other words, we're going to leave on October the 31st either with a deal that doesn't have the backstop or with no deal. So as far as everyone is concerned, that is what Johnson has been promising. So, when asked directly, is that how he answered last night? In a word, no. The fact that he has avoided doing interviews during this campaign, relying on scripted statements, should have told us that he was always going to be evasive, and indeed he was. He refused to commit to leaving the EU on October 31st. He regarded the prospect of leaving on that date, and I quote, as eminently feasible. Feasible? So not certain, we're not definitely leaving then. He's not even saying we're likely to leave, we're probably going to leave. He's simply saying that it's possible. You know, so he's moved right from we're definitely leaving October the 31st if I'm Prime Minister to we might leave at the end of October. I mean, we can't rule it out. Yeah, I reckon it could happen. So his position now is that we're not going to be leaving the EU at the end of October. I wonder how his supporters are going to feel about that. The ones who are even aware of it. Many may not even be aware. Rory Stewart, the only person taking part in the debate who had anything positive to say, was also hell-bent on ensuring that he can't possibly win the contest. Not only is his Brexit position completely out of kilter with how people perceive the Tory membership to be, but he also had a word or two about taxes, and those words were not about cutting them. Something Boris Johnson at least promised. He really has tried to set himself out as the anti-Boris candidate on virtually everything. Every time he speaks, I become more and more convinced that he is positioning himself, as I say, as the future I told you so candidate. And you know, for whichever Boris or Boris clone ends up winning and then fouling everything up. It's not his Brexit position that makes me think Rory Stewart is the only candidate with any intelligence. It's the fact that he seems to know that now is not a good time to be Conservative leader. All candidates ruled out a general election until Brexit has been resolved. Not surprising, as they're all scared witless about the consequences of a general election, whilst the Brexit Party remains relevant to a large chunk of their traditional support base. Besides, their donations have all but dried up, so they wouldn't have much of a war chest with which to fight the campaign anyway, unless, of course, more donors come back now that Theresa May will be about to disappear. Today we had round 3 as the race is on to whittle the candidates down to the last two by the end of the week. So there's quite a lot of time between rounds 1 and 2. Next, it's just going to be every day now. Disappointingly, but not unexpectedly, Rory Stewart has been knocked out. He was never likely to win support from Dominic Raab. Every time someone's knocked out, you're wondering where those supporters are going to go. They were not going to back Rory Stewart. He reckoned he actually grabbed a couple of them. No, I don't think he did. He actually lost supporters. He got fewer votes than in the previous round. Not surprising, as I say, given his wholly impossible position in the TV debate yesterday. And as I've also said, I don't think he'll be privately disappointed. Seems to me it's all going to plan for a future leadership bid. Now is not the time to be Conservative Party leader. And after being knocked out, Rory Stewart did tweet this. He said, "I didn't get enough MPs to believe today, but they will." Now, if that's not a pitch for the future, I don't know what is. Jeremy Hunt remains in second place, just ahead of Michael Gove. However, that could change with Rory Stewart's removal. I would say that MPs supporting Stewart are much more likely to back Michael Gove than either Jeremy Hunt or Sajid Javid. Of the 4 remaining candidates, Gove is now the only one left who is really opposing Boris Johnson in any meaningful way, and indeed was the one who stabbed him in the back in the last leadership election. Not that there was an election in the end, I suppose. But there will be now a feeling that there are no candidates left who provide any serious alternative to Boris Johnson. Much has been made, not least from myself, that no favourite has ever won a Conservative leadership election. But I think there's a first time for everything, and this is probably going to be that first time. But, of course, we have to wait until late July to be certain. What happens now is there's going to be another round or two, unless people drop out, to whittle it down to the last 2. That has to happen by the end of this week. So by Friday, so that they can send out the postal ballots to the members. That'll be happening next week. The results are expected on the week beginning July 22nd. So we've got another month and a bit to wait. And then, of course, Parliament should confirm that choice as Prime Minister. I expect that to happen, whoever it is. And then don't expect anything, because then it'll be summer. They'll all be going off for summer recess. So it'll be September when the fireworks begin. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for further content. Until next time, I'll see you later.